Essay number 3. The Psychology of Chanting. Why Repetition Changes the Mind. An exploration of how repetitive vocal practice influences attention, emotion, memory, breathing, and inner experience through the perspectives of psychology, neuroscience, and contemplative traditions. There are moments when the mind seems unable to remain still. Thoughts follow one another without pause. Memories return unexpectedly. Worries about the future compete for attention, while the present moment quietly slips away. In such moments, a person may try to silence the mind by force. Yet the more firmly we command ourselves not to think, the more insistently our thoughts often return. Chanting offers a different approach. Instead of fighting the movement of the mind, it gives that movement a rhythm. A sound is repeated. The breath begins to follow it. Attention returns to the same phrase, syllable, prayer, or melody. Little by little, mental activity may become less scattered, not because the mind has been defeated, but because it has been given a steady place to rest. This is one reason chanting has appeared in so many cultures and spiritual traditions. Hindu and Buddhist mantras, Christian repetitive prayer, Jewish sacred recitation, Islamic dhikr, Sikh kirtan, indigenous ceremonial songs, and many other practices differ greatly in theology and meaning, yet they share something psychologically significant: the intentional repetition of sound. What happens within us when we repeat a meaningful sound? Why can repetition sometimes calm the mind, regulate emotion, and deepen concentration? And why has the human voice remained one of our most enduring instruments of contemplation? The mind needs an anchor. Human attention is naturally unstable. Even when we intend to focus on one thing, the mind frequently moves toward memories, plans, worries, sensations, and imagined conversations. This tendency is not necessarily a failure. It is part of ordinary mental life. However, when attention becomes excessively scattered, it may contribute to restlessness, stress, or emotional exhaustion. Repetitive chanting provides an attentional anchor. The practitioner returns repeatedly to the sound of the voice, the movement of the lips and tongue, the rhythm of the phrase, the physical sensation of vibration, the flow of the breath, or the meaning associated with the words. Each time attention wanders, the chant offers a point of return. This resembles other contemplative practices in which attention is gently brought back to the breath, a bodily sensation, or a chosen object. The important psychological act is not maintaining perfect concentration without interruption. It is the repeated return. The mind wanders. We notice. We return. Through this process, repetition becomes a form of mental training. Mantra practice is often classified as a form of meditation involving focused or repetitive attention, although researchers caution that different meditation methods may operate through partly different mechanisms and should not all be treated as identical. Repetition reduces the burden of choice. Much of daily life demands constant decision-making. What should I do next? What should I say? Which thought deserves attention? How should I respond? The nervous system is continually processing novelty, uncertainty, and competing information. Chanting temporarily simplifies this landscape. There is one sound, one phrase, one rhythm, one returning movement of attention. Because the verbal pattern is predictable, the mind does not need to continually generate new material. With continued repetition, the vocal sequence can become increasingly automatic, requiring less deliberate effort. This does not mean that awareness disappears. Rather, part of the mind is released from the need to make constant choices. That may create space for a quieter and more receptive form of attention. Some researchers have proposed that highly practiced mantra repetition becomes partly automatic, combining sensory and motor activity while reducing the amount of conscious effort needed to sustain the practice. The psychological power of repetition may therefore lie partly in its simplicity. For a short period, we are no longer required to invent the next moment. We allow the next sound to arise from the rhythm already established. Repetition and the wandering self. When external demands decrease, the brain does not simply become inactive. It often turns towards self-related thought, personal memories, imagined futures, evaluations, worries, and internal narratives. A network of brain regions commonly associated with this kind of internally directed mental activity is often called the default mode network. In one small brain imaging study, repetitive speech was associated with widespread reductions in activity compared with ordinary resting conditions, particularly in regions connected with self-referential processing. The authors interpreted this cautiously, suggesting that simple repetitive speech may help reduce some forms of internally generated mental activity. This finding should not be exaggerated. One study cannot prove that chanting universally switches off the thinking mind, and spiritual chanting cannot be reduced entirely to a brain scan. Still, the result offers an interesting possibility. When attention is absorbed in a repeated sound, the internal narrator may temporarily become less dominant. The mind is no longer endlessly explaining itself to itself. For a moment, experience may become less about the story of me, and more about breathing, listening, vibration, and presence. The voice, the breath, and the nervous system. Chanting is not only a cognitive activity. It is also physical. To chant aloud, we must regulate the breath. Many forms of chanting naturally lengthen the exhalation because a syllable or phrase is sustained across the outgoing breath. This matters because breathing patterns and autonomic regulation are closely connected. The autonomic nervous system helps regulate processes such as heart rate, respiration, digestion, and physiological arousal. Slow, regular breathing, particularly when exhalation is gently prolonged, may support parasympathetic activity, the branch of autonomic regulation associated with rest, restoration, and reduced defensive activation. A well-known study of rosary prayer and yoga mantras found that recitation at approximately 6 cycles per minute slowed breathing and synchronized certain cardiovascular rhythms, while increasing baroreflex sensitivity, a measure related to cardiovascular regulation. Other small studies of audible mantra or Om chanting have reported short-term changes in heart rate variability consistent with increased parasympathetic influence. These findings are promising, but sample sizes have often been modest, methods vary. And they should not be interpreted as proof that chanting produces the same physiological effect in every person. The rhythm of chanting may therefore influence the mind indirectly through the body. The sound shapes the breath. The breath influences physiological arousal. Changes in arousal affect the quality of attention and emotion. What appears to be a simple repeated phrase can become a coordinated activity involving voice, respiration, hearing, movement, memory, and feeling. Vibration as embodied experience. When we chant aloud, we do not merely hear a sound coming from outside ourselves. We produce it within the body. We may feel vibration in the chest, throat, mouth, face, or skull. The body becomes both the instrument and the listener. This is one reason chanting can feel different from silently reading the same words. The phrase is no longer only an idea. It becomes an event. Breath becomes sound. Sound becomes sensation. Sensation becomes attention. It is important to distinguish this embodied experience from unsupported claims that particular frequencies can cure diseases or exert precisely defined supernatural effects. Scientific evidence does not justify such sweeping conclusions. Yet it is entirely reasonable to say that vocalization creates real acoustic and bodily sensations, and that attending to these sensations can help bring awareness away from abstract rumination and toward immediate experience. In this sense, vibration can act as a psychological bridge between mind and body. Rhythm creates predictability. The human nervous system is highly responsive to rhythm. We walk rhythmically. We breathe rhythmically. The heart beats rhythmically. Speech, music, movement, and sleep all contain patterns of timing. Predictable rhythm can create a sense of structure. When a chant repeats at a steady pace, the practitioner begins to anticipate the next sound and the next breath. This reduces uncertainty. Psychologically, predictability can feel stabilizing. An anxious mind often lives in anticipation of what cannot be controlled. Chanting introduces a small, manageable world in which the next moment is known. The phrase will return. The melody will resolve. The breath will begin again. That does not remove the uncertainties of life, but it may offer the nervous system a temporary experience of order. When chanting is accompanied by a harmonium, drum, hand cymbals, or gentle bodily movement, several rhythms may become coordinated at once. Voice, breath, melody, and movement begin to form a common pattern. The result can be a state of absorption in which effort feels reduced, and the distinction between performing and listening becomes less clear. From repetition to absorption. At first, repetition may feel mechanical. The mind becomes distracted. The words may seem ordinary. The practitioner may wonder whether anything is happening. But as the rhythm continues, the relationship to repetition can change. The phrase may become more familiar. Breathing becomes more natural. Self-consciousness may diminish. Attention becomes less forced. This can sometimes lead to a state resembling absorption or flow, a condition in which attention is deeply engaged and awareness of time or external distraction is reduced. A cross-cultural survey of chanting practitioners found that people reported experiences involving mindfulness, flow, reduced mind wandering, altered states, and enhanced quality of life. Because the study relied on self-reports and did not establish cause and effect, its findings should be viewed as descriptive rather than definitive. Nevertheless, it illustrates the broad range of experiences that people associate with chanting across traditions. The transition from mechanical repetition to absorption is important. Repetition does not always make experience duller. Sometimes it allows us to perceive more. When the outer form becomes familiar, subtle changes become noticeable. A shift in breath, a new emotional tone, a different resonance in the voice, or a moment of unexpected silence between phrases. Emotion and the repeated sound. Chanting can also influence emotional experience. A repeated phrase may carry feelings of hope, surrender, devotion, gratitude, courage, mourning, or belonging. With every repetition, the emotional association may be renewed and strengthened. The words do not function only as information. They become an emotional environment. Some experimental studies suggest that brief chanting may alter how people respond to unpleasant stimuli. Research involving Buddhist chanting and Om chanting has reported changes in later stages of emotional or cognitive processing, as well as reduced subjective unpleasantness or arousal when viewing negative images. These findings are intriguing, but the evidence remains limited and does not establish chanting as a treatment for emotional disorders. A psychological explanation may involve several interacting processes. Attention is redirected toward the chant. Breathing becomes more regular. Physiological arousal may decrease. The phrase activates meaningful memories or beliefs. And the predictable rhythm creates a sense of safety and continuity. The emotional effect of a chant, therefore, cannot be separated from its context. The same syllables may be spiritually profound for one person, culturally unfamiliar to another, and emotionally uncomfortable for someone else. Meaning matters. Memory matters. Personal history matters. The power of meaning. Some forms of chanting use words with clear linguistic meaning. Others emphasize sacred syllables, sound patterns, or phrases whose meaning may be symbolic, poetic, or difficult to translate directly. In either case, the psychological experience is shaped by what the practitioner believes the sound represents. A chant associated with compassion may repeatedly orient the mind toward compassion. A prayer of gratitude may train attention to notice what is valued. A sacred name may evoke a sense of relationship with the divine. A phrase about peace may become an internal refuge during distress. This does not mean that repeating words automatically transforms character. Repetition without reflection can become empty habit. It can even be used manipulatively when imposed through fear, social pressure, or rigid authority. But when repetition is voluntary, meaningful, and accompanied by awareness, it may strengthen particular mental and emotional associations. What we repeatedly attend to can gradually become more cognitively available. What we repeatedly practice can become easier to return to. In that sense, chanting may act not as magical programming, but as a form of intentional psychological orientation. Memory, learning, and oral tradition. Long before sacred teachings were widely written, repetition helped communities preserve them. Rhythm, melody, rhyme, and repeated structure make language easier to remember. A passage that is difficult to retain as prose may become much more accessible when sung or chanted. Chanting, therefore, has a double function. It changes the immediate state of attention, but it also carries memory through time. Through repeated recitation, individuals learn not only words but also pronunciation, rhythm, emotional tone, and communal identity. The teaching is stored not merely as information, but as an embodied pattern. This is why sacred chants can remain deeply familiar even after many years. The voice remembers. The breath remembers. The body remembers the rhythm before the conscious mind reconstructs every word. Chanting together, the psychology of connection. Chanting is often practiced collectively. When people sing or recite together, individual voices become part of a shared sound. Breathing, tempo, phrasing, and attention may become partially synchronized. This can create a powerful experience of belonging. For a time, a person does not need to carry the whole musical or emotional experience alone. The group sustains the rhythm. The individual voice may tremble, pause, or grow quiet, yet the chant continues. Preliminary research on group chanting has reported reductions in perceived stress or anxiety and increases in feelings of social connection after brief sessions. However, studies have generally involved small samples, and it remains difficult to separate the effects of vocalization, breathing, expectation, ritual, music, group membership, and shared meaning. From a psychological perspective, this complexity is not a weakness of the experience. It is part of what chanting is. Human beings rarely heal, learn, celebrate, or grieve through one isolated mechanism. We respond to combinations of sound, meaning, relationship, memory, movement, and place. Group chanting brings many of these elements together. Silence within sound. One of the paradoxes of chanting is that continuous sound may lead to a deeper awareness of silence. Before chanting begins, silence may feel empty or restless. After prolonged repetition, the silence that follows can feel entirely different. It may seem spacious, alive, almost tangible. Psychologically, the repeated phrase has temporarily reduced the number of competing objects of attention. When the sound stops, awareness may remain gathered rather than immediately dispersing. The silence is not merely the absence of chanting. It is the resonance left behind by chanting. Perhaps this is why many contemplative traditions do not regard sound and silence as opposites. Sound can become a doorway into silence, while silence allows the meaning of sound to be felt more deeply. Carl Gustav Jung, Repetition, Symbol, and the Deeper Psyche. Carl Gustav Jung did not develop a systematic scientific theory of chanting, and it would be misleading to attribute one to him. Nevertheless, several of his psychological ideas can help us reflect on why repeated sacred sounds may possess such depth. Jung believed that human beings encounter the psyche not only through rational concepts, but also through symbols, images, myths, rituals, and recurring patterns. A symbol, in Jung's understanding, is not merely a sign with one fixed definition. It points toward meanings that cannot be fully exhausted by explanation. A mantra, prayer, or sacred phrase may function in a similar way for the person who practices it. Its meaning may deepen over time. At one moment, it may express comfort. At another, longing. At another, surrender, joy, grief, or mystery. The words remain the same, but the person meeting them has changed. From a Jungian perspective, repetition may allow a symbol to descend beneath the level of purely intellectual understanding. Through repeated encounter, it may become connected with memory, emotion, imagination, and the unconscious. Yet Jung also warned, in various contexts, against unconscious conformity and psychological inflation. Repetition is not automatically transformative simply because it is religious. If a practice is used to avoid painful realities, suppress individuality, or surrender responsibility to an authority, it may become psychologically limiting. The important question is therefore not only what words are being repeated, it is also what relationship is the person developing with those words. Are they becoming more conscious, compassionate, and integrated? Or are they using repetition to escape thought, deny conflict, or obey without reflection? A mature contemplative practice should not destroy psychological individuality. Ideally, it should help a person meet the deeper layers of the self with greater honesty. When repetition helps, and when it may not. Chanting is not equally beneficial in every situation. For many people, it can be calming, meaningful, and emotionally supportive. For others, repetitive sound may be overstimulating, tiring, culturally alien, or connected with painful religious experiences. Very intense or prolonged practices may occasionally contribute to dizziness, emotional flooding, dissociation, sleep disruption, or distress, particularly when combined with forced breathing, sleep deprivation, fasting, extreme retreat conditions, or existing mental health vulnerability. A gentle practice should therefore remain grounded in bodily awareness and personal choice. It is reasonable to stop or shorten the practice when it creates discomfort. No one should be pressured to chant. No one should be told that anxiety, depression, trauma, or serious illness persists because they lack faith or have not repeated a mantra enough times. Chanting may support well-being, but it is not a substitute for professional medical or psychological care when such care is needed. The most responsible position lies between two extremes. We do not need to dismiss chanting as only repetition, nor should we claim that it can cure every form of suffering. We can appreciate its psychological richness while remaining honest about the limits of current evidence. The harmonium as a companion to the voice. The harmonium adds another dimension to chanting. Its sustained tones give the voice a stable musical foundation. The practitioner does not sing into emptiness. The melody is held by a continuous field of sound. The bellows connect music with breathing and movement. One hand supplies air. The other shapes the melody. The voice follows. The whole practice becomes an interaction between body, instrument, attention, and sound. Because a harmonium can sustain a note beneath a repeated phrase, it can create a sense of continuity even during brief pauses in the voice. The instrument seems to carry the chant forward. For the person playing, this requires a distinctive form of divided yet unified attention. Listening to pitch, maintaining rhythm, regulating the bellows, remembering the words, coordinating the hands, breathing, and remaining emotionally present. At first, these tasks may feel separate. With practice, they begin to function as one movement. The musician is no longer merely operating an instrument. The harmonium, voice, and breath become part of a single contemplative process. Why repetition changes the mind? Repetition changes the mind because the mind itself is shaped by repeated experience. A single return of attention may appear insignificant. but every return practices returning. Every calm breath practices calm breathing. Every meaningful phrase strengthens a pathway toward that meaning. Every moment of listening weakens, however briefly, the habit of constant mental commentary. The change may not be dramatic. It may not arrive as a revelation. It may appear slowly. A little more patience, a greater ability to remain with one task, a softer response to distress, a deeper awareness of breathing, a renewed sense of meaning, or an increased capacity to sit quietly after the final note. This is how many important human changes occur. Not through one overwhelming moment, but through the quiet accumulation of repeated acts. A melody is learned note by note. A path is formed step by step. And the mind is shaped, in part, by what it repeatedly practices returning to. A path of harmony reflection. Perhaps chanting does not ask us to empty the mind. Perhaps it teaches us how to return. We return from distraction to sound, from tension to breath, from isolation to a shared voice, from restless thought to embodied presence. And when the mind wanders again, as it inevitably will, the chant does not condemn it. It simply begins once more. There is great gentleness in that. The phrase returns without impatience. The melody welcomes us back without asking where we have been. The breath offers another beginning. Maybe this is the deepest psychology of chanting. Not the achievement of a permanently silent mind, but the discovery that we are always capable of returning. Returning to attention. Returning to meaning. Returning to one another. Returning to the quiet place within us from which every sincere sound first arises. Further reading. Bernardi, L. et al. Effective Rosary Prayer and Yoga Mantras on Autonomic Cardiovascular Rhythms. Berkovich Ohana, A. et al. Repetitive speech elicits widespread deactivation in the human cortex. Gao, J. et al. Repetitive religious chanting modulates emotional and cognitive processing. Inbaraj, G. et al. Immediate effects of Om chanting on heart rate variability. Perry, G. et al. How chanting relates to cognitive function, altered states, and quality of life. Tomasino, B. et al. Meditation-related brain activations and the influence of meditation style. Educational note. This essay is intended for educational and reflective purposes. Research on chanting and mantra-based practices is developing, but many studies remain small or methodologically limited. Chanting may support relaxation, attention, emotional regulation, and social connection for some people, but it should not be presented as a cure or as a replacement for qualified medical or psychological treatment. Next essay in the series. Essay number 4, Music and Depression, Finding Hope Through Sound.